You know those adorable little miniature orchids you see everywhere? They look like perfect, tiny versions of the big ones, but they are holding on to a secret, a really big one, that completely changes how you need to take care of them. So let's dive in. So let's just tackle this question right away. You've seen them, you've probably even bought one, but do you actually know what makes a mini orchid mini? Because figuring that out, well, that's the key to everything. All right. First things first, we have got to bust the single biggest myth about these little guys. It's time to crack their genetic code. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off right now. So many people think they've bought a baby orchid that's going to grow into a big one someday. That is just not true. The fact is, this is a fully mature, genetically distinct plant. It was specifically bred to be small. So if you see flowers on it, you're looking at a full-grown adult, not a child. And these differences, they're not temporary. They are permanent. Just look at the tail of the tape here. A mini's leaf span maxes out under 15 centimeters. A standard can be 4 times that. Easy. The flowers, the pot they live in, everything is on a totally different scale. And that's locked right into its DNA. It's never going to change. So, what does being permanently tiny actually mean for how we care for them? Well, it all comes down to the simple physics of their very small homes. Okay, stick with me here. This might sound a little bit technical, but I promise it is the master key to understanding everything about these plants. A small pot has a really, really high surface area to volume ratio. Just think about it like this. A single ice cube melts way faster than a giant iceberg, right? It's because more of its surface is exposed to the air. It's the same principle. And here is the punchline of that little science lesson. A tiny pot is basically all surface. There's no deep, moist core inside to hold water, and that means it loses moisture incredibly fast. We're talking hours, not days, like you might be used to with bigger plants. And what that means for you and your watering can is huge. That little mini pot needs you to be checking on it pretty much daily, because when it starts to dry out, the whole thing dries out all at once. A standard pot, on the other hand, has that big moisture reservoir in the middle. It gives you a much bigger cushion, so a weekly check-in is usually just fine. Okay, so with that physics lesson in our back pocket, how do we actually manage their life support systems? Let's get into the practical side of things: the water, the food, and the pot itself. Now, your first instinct might be to stick your finger in the potting mix to see if it's dry, right? Forget that. With orchids, the plant itself gives you this perfect visual cue. The real secret is to learn how to read the roots, specifically that spongy outer layer called the velamen. When that spongy layer is full of water, it actually becomes see-through, and you can see the green chlorophyll inside the root itself. So if you see that beautiful, vibrant green, that is a happy, perfectly hydrated orchid. Step away from the watering can. But as soon as that velamen dries out, it fills up with air. And that air reflects light, making the root look this silvery white color. That's it. That's your signal. The plant is literally telling you, hey, I'm ready for a drink now. Now, if you wait too long, and it doesn't take much with a mini, you're going to see this. The roots start to look wrinkled, kind of gray, just sad. This is a sign of critical dehydration. The plant is officially stressed out, and you need to get it some water stat. All right, so we know when to water, but that leads us to a really popular and pretty controversial question. What about the ice cube? I mean, so many of these minis are sold with instructions to just plop an ice cube on top. Is that actually a good idea? Look, I get the appeal. It's simple, it's pre-measured, it stops you from dumping a whole cup of water in there, but, and this is a really big but, you have to remember these are tropical plants. They evolved to expect warm rainwater. Hitting their super sensitive roots with near freezing water can cause thermal shock and actually damage the very tissues they use to drink. Now let's talk about what their roots are actually living in. Your mini almost certainly came packed in sphagnum moss, and it's great for shipping because it holds a ton of water. But at home, that can be a problem. It gets compacted, cuts off airflow, and can lead to root rot. Bark mix is the opposite. It gives you amazing aeration, but in a tiny pot, it can dry out dangerously fast. It's a real trade-off. All right, we've gone super micro and we've mastered the pot. Now let's zoom out and talk about mastering the tiny climate your orchid lives in. The air, the light, and of course the humidity all around it.
Here's the recipe for a perfect day in your orchid's life. It wants bright light, but not scorching direct sun. An east-facing window is usually the sweet spot. It also needs a little temperature drop at night, about 10 to 15 degrees. That's the biological trigger that tells it, hey, it's time to make some flowers. And finally, humidity. Your house is probably a desert to this plant. They are craving 50 to 70% humidity.
And you might be thinking, how am I supposed to create a rainforest in my living room? Well, it's actually way easier than it sounds. A simple tray with some pebbles and water underneath the pot works wonders. The evaporating water raises the humidity right around the plant. Or just group your plants together. They'll create their own little humid microclimate. You can also mist, but just make sure you do it in the morning so the leaves are dry by nightfall. That helps prevent any rot from setting in.
So after all that, let's bring it all together. What is the final expert takeaway? What does this all really mean for you and your mini orchid? I think this quote just absolutely nails it. We shouldn't think about caring for minis as orchid care light. It's not simpler. It's actually a practice that demands a higher level of precision. And that really is the heart of it. That's the secret. Miniature orchids aren't necessarily harder to care for. They just have a much, much smaller buffer for error. That tiny pot and tiny root system mean you can't really forget a watering. But if you give them that consistency they need, they will reward you with the most spectacular, long-lasting blooms in a beautiful, tiny package. And that kind of leaves us with one last question, doesn't it? Now that you know the secret is all about precision, not difficulty, it really makes you wonder, what other famously fussy plants out there might just be completely misunderstood